All right, so today I thought I would start by telling you a little bit more about Organic Farmers Association, go over the priorities for the next farm bill that farmers from Organic Farmers Association have identified, and then talk a little bit about the organic grain market and some things in play and some policy fixes that OFA is looking to strengthen that market. And then talk a little bit about the next administration, where we are in looking for the Secretary of Agriculture and some of the new appointments in Congress and what that might mean for the Farm Bill, and then do some question and answer. So I'm also happy to take burning questions if they pop up as we're going along. So Organic Farmers Association was started in 2017 by organic farmers for organic farmers, because we wanted to make sure, like Angela said, there is a strong voice representing organic farmer interests specifically in Washington, D.C. And the way that the organization was designed is that only certified organic farmers have a vote on our leadership, and only certified organic farmers have a vote in our policy, the policies that we represent. So it really is through and through run by organic farmers. Many of our team working at OFA are also organic farmers as well as working at OFA. So we have a hand in the soil at the same time we're trying to affect policy and improve the challenges that you're all seeing on the farm. I myself farm a small, diversified, certified organic livestock farm in Okoboji, Iowa, not too far from South Dakota. So if I look to the west, I might be able to see some of your eastern border. One thing that we do every year is an annual policy development survey. And so that's been sent out to all certified organic farmers are invited to participate in that. It was included in our most recent magazine as a version you could print out and submit, or it's a little bit more comprehensive to do it online. And that's open to all certified organic farmers, whether you're a member or not. It's also open to organic organizations. So if, within an organization you're a part of, you go through a process where you're identifying policy priorities at the state or regional level, those also can be submitted. And so I just encourage you to participate in that, because that sets our policy priorities for the year, which is essentially what OFA is working on in Washington, D.C. There's also an opportunity to put forward policy positions you want the organization to consider. We have an extensive list of policy positions that certified organic farmer members of OFA have voted on and approved. And so then when things come up in DC, we use that to know, can OFA support or oppose this policy based on policies that our farmers have passed? And if we don't have a policy, then we use our policy committee for review, and it may go into solidifying that into an actual policy position at our next annual process. But we've just started that survey now. The deadline is January 26th, so something you can do over the winter. The other thing we're asking for on this survey is for farmer feedback on risk-based certification. So the strengthening organic enforcement rule went into effect in March, and we really advocated for that rule. There's a lot of new implementation within SOE to mitigate fraud and lessen fraud within the organic marketplace, and it was not intended to increase the record-keeping burden for small and mid-sized producers. But what we're seeing on the ground is that domestic, low-risk producers are feeling an increase in record-keeping. And so we are just doing an assessment to find out, how is this working for you? What kind of pieces of certification might be inappropriate for your operation? Do we need to look at certification now? We'll be nearing the 25-year mark of the program in 2016, and the market looks so different than it did in 2001, 2002. And so I think it's okay to really take a step back and look at what we've created and find out, do we need to take a fresh look at this? We have a great organic certification program, but the market has really become more complex as well. And so we don't want to lose small, low-risk farms, as we are also needing to ramp up our enforcement and traceability within like higher, more complex supply chain operations. So that's a part of that too. Encourage you to participate in that. I'm happy to send these links to Angela when we're done. Another thing that we have at Organic Farmers Association is a monthly gathering for farmers in our Farmer Circle program. So we run 2 monthly farmer circles. One is called the Collective Farmer Circle, and you can just show up at this monthly meeting. We've started to introduce topics so there's a bit of conversation around something that might interest you, but also if something's really bothering you on your farm or you had a frustrating encounter trying to get your certification cost share or something else, you can show up there and we can help, and it will help inform issues that we need to work on as well. So those are monthly. We also run a soil and soul circle, which is really geared to folks who want more of an identity space, primarily focused at Black, Asian, queer, Hispanic, and Indigenous farmers. Then this is another way that we do our policy work. So we've started these farmer work groups around issues that you have told us are important to you. So we have an organic dairy work group that has been working together. It's a national coalition of organic dairy farmers and organic dairy producer groups that were responding to loss of organic dairy farmers from the market, some consolidation in the market, and identifying the problem, farmers leading, identifying those solutions, and then OFA was there to help put that into policy solutions. So we have a marker bill in both the Senate and House versions of the Farm Bill that came out of that working group. We have a very active organic crop insurance working group trying to identify improvements to the crop insurance program so that they work better for transitioning in organic farmers. We have a group that meets before the spring and fall National Organic Standards Board meeting. So if you like that in-depth policy wonk review for organic standards, that's a great place to key in. And farmers are really leading this work for OFA. We have a new group on NRCS, but sort of first and foremost, we're looking at the new organic management program, which is the 823 program. And we have just started a risk-based certification program so that farmers are going to be leading how we interact with that conversation around certification and keeping those small, low risk producers in a program that still makes sense for their scale of business. So moving into policy solutions, I wanted to outline some of the work that we've been doing on the Farm Bill. This was supposed to be the 2023 Farm Bill, so there's been many years of work on the Farm Bill. We always have an annual advocacy day in DC. So we started working on Farm Bill language in 2022, 2023, 2024, and now it looks like we'll also be honing that in 2025, but hopefully this year we can get it done. So we're continuing those. The time has not been bad for organic farming because we've been able to enter more marker bills that are responsive to farmer needs during that process. So while we do want to get a farm bill done, we've been able to use that time to our advantage. We have on our website a farm bill marker bill tracker. So the marker bills are the many different components of bills that go into the big farm bill. And so you can see what language has been incorporated into the farm bill so far from these priority areas. We worked with farmers in a national survey, regional meetings, a big Zoom meeting that was national to get farmer feedback for where they wanted our priorities to land for farm bill work. And so that has really influenced how we've prioritized our time. So one of those priority areas was climate and conservation. And so the legislation that we are supporting that encompasses those values is the Agriculture Resilience Act. There's a Senate and House version of that act. And so it outlines it enhances programs that support practices on the farm that have climate benefits. It also would increase the organic initiative component of the NRCS EQIP so that the funding level matches the regular EQIP funding level. So organic farmers don't have to choose if you're applying to the organic initiative or to the regular program. And then it expands the conservation stewardship program, which has a lot of practices that can enhance organic producers' conservation practices on their farm. There's a really interesting bill called Opportunities in Organic Act that would help expand organic production. There's a Senate and a House version of that. It expands cost share. The cost share reimbursement rates have not increased since the program was introduced in 2008. So we know that certification costs have increased, and we are looking for an increase to reimbursement of that program to $1,500 per scope. OFA is advocating for 100% reimbursement up to $1,500 per scope, and I expect there to be some negotiation there, but that is what we're asking based on farmers' feedback. It also continues some of the programming that we've seen through the Transition to Organic Producer funding, the TOP program. So transition and resilience grants that would continue technical assistance in organic and transition, financial planning support, outreach to underserved farmers, translation of the training and certification paperwork. We're also looking to increase infrastructure for organic. We know as like markets develop and folks want to expand what they're planting and bolster markets for those rotation crops that make it challenging to expand your rotation. Under some recent USDA funding, they introduced the Organic Market Development Grant, and this act would expand that and make that an actual USDA program rather than just a temporary pilot program. So it would give funding to producers or producer groups to invest in the infrastructure needed to grow our organic markets. Organic research is always really important and always a priority for OFA. So there's a House and a Senate bill that asks for more funding for organic research. We believe that organic research helps all producers, not just organic producers. There's a lot of conventional producers planting cover crops now. A lot of that research came out of organic research funding. So it really does support conservation practices on all farms. Another one that I threw on here was the Seeds and Breeds for the Future Act. There's just a Senate version of this bill, but it increases funding for public seed and breed research. All right, next section of what I wanted to share with you is about the organic grain market. But before we do that, were there any questions on the various bills that we're tracking?
Checking to see. Doesn't look like any questions yet in the chat.
Okay. Just pop in if any come up. I know that the organic grain market has been struggling and that the prices are really depressed for the last few months and the last few years. So we have been paying attention to that. I wanted to bring to your attention, it's probably been buzzing around farmer networks, but the National Organic Program did send out a directive on West Africa. So we've been seeing a lot of imports on soybeans and soybean meal from West Africa. And they did send out a directive for the certifiers working in that region to make sure that they're doing more rigorous inspections and residue testing. And they've also asked for those certifiers to submit their plans for enforcement and oversight. That deadline has passed, so they're under review there. It also, I think, put a highlight on it for US-based certifiers to watch the sourcing of grain and make sure that all the paperwork is in check and perhaps move it up into a high-risk feedstuff import where additional residue testing could be done. So that was, I think, really positive to see that from the National Organic Program. I know that import fraud is a really high priority of the program, and they're spending a lot of resources on it. It's not always a fast fix regulatorily for them, and so we're looking at other ways to help them stay more on top of it. One of those is a marker bill that we haven't yet gotten both. It hasn't been officially introduced to the Senate. I feel like we're close. We're trying to get consensus within the organic community before we can do that. It's called the Organic Import Verification Act, and it would give a little bit more authority and substance behind the National Organic Program assessing risk of imports due to the yield data coming from countries and the availability to actually grow that much, looking at how much organic is coming from different areas. based on versus previous years, um, as well as other information from the EU and other ports where we do have equivalency agreement. So it would give more authority to the National Organic Program to require residue testing from high-risk imports at the points of entry. So we're hoping that includes both shipping ports where those bulk ships are bringing a very large quantity. Um, Yeah, it's a good question in the chat with starvation and political discord. Why is Western Africa playing a role in exporting grains to the US? I think sometimes the chain of like where those grains are coming to before they get to West Africa is a traceability problem they're trying to get a better handle on. And also the money. The money is so much better for import for organic grains in the US. The demand is really high still. And so it's an economic advantage to sell it to our market. Um, but definitely a question I think to keep in the conversation. This bill, the Organic Import Verification Act, would also require the National Organic Program to do an annual report on high risk imports. This bill is specified to feedstuffs, but it could be expanded to other commodities. And I think it would set the protocol to do that. It's sponsored by Nebraska Senator Ricketts, and we're looking for a co-sponsor in the Senate. So if we have any connections to Minnesota Senator Smith, that's the one we're really working on. And we're working on our sort of national organic allies to get consensus there. We're very close. And then hoping to get her to sign on. Senator Durbin from Illinois is another potential Democratic co-sponsor, phase 2. So I think that messaging bill has a lot of hope. It doesn't require extra funding, so I think in the upcoming political climate it has potential to be added to the Farm Bill. By importing those grains, are we participating in their starvation? Good question. It's a social question. With the international trade agreements, those type of assessments are not brought into play. So it's really just market driven. But I think it's a good thing to ask your feed dealers, where are you buying your grains from? Should be buying them from domestic producers. I also wanted to talk about the recent clawback letters. So if you sell corn and soybeans, I'm sure that you have been knowledgeable about the clawback letters that have been coming out in the last 4 years. The first one was from Pipeline Foods. They declared bankruptcy in July 2021. They sent out clawback letters a year later in July 2022. It was the first time that we had really seen this in the organic community. And so OFA was trying to help. We did have a bunch of resources out there, but we were just kind of scrambling to figure out how to best support farmers and what the best strategy going forward was. And then later that year, when Global Processing submitted their bankruptcy in 2022, we started to get ready, expecting that there might be a clawback. So we were expecting it in September 2023. It didn't happen then. We put out a bunch of resources analyzing what happened with Pipeline, but then unfortunately they did send out clawback letters in September of this year. So we were ready to act. We sent postcards to all farmers that sold corn and soybeans in a 12-state area around Iowa, because that's where Global Processing was located. We did eventually convince the trustee to share a partial list of who had received letters with us. So we got about 58% of the 90 farmers, and we called each of those farmers individually and offered support. We also found a lawyer who is an expert in both agricultural law and bankruptcy law to be available if farmers needed an attorney knowledgeable in those two areas to represent them, to try to create some collective strategy and cost savings there. And while we didn't necessarily endorse this lawyer, we felt like he was a good option for farmers and made that available for folks who just needed to find somebody. So we've been doing a lot of outreach. We know that over $5.5 million was requested for clawback. We helped a lot of farmers negotiate out of that because they could prove that they were operating in the normal course of business. The the argument that worked the best was if they delivered grain and were paid within 30 days. But other farmers were also able to make that case. Um, and now we're looking for a policy protection so that farmers don't continue to see this in the organic grain market because it really has destabilize the market. And then we have a lot of farmers interested in transitioning, and we don't want them to transition to a market that's not stable. And so we've been talking to USDA, we've been talking to American Farm Bureau Federation to work with them to find a solution because a lot of non-GMO farmers were also caught up in this clawback. So stay tuned. And
Kate,
if,
can you
yeah,
explain bankruptcy code clawback? I'm not familiar with that term at all.
yeah, of course. I know I am not a lawyer, but I've really learned a lot about bankruptcy code, unfortunately. So what happens is when a business goes bankrupt, they go through bankruptcy proceedings, and after those proceedings are done, this is mostly Chapter 11 bankruptcy, um, the court either assigns an attorney, which happened to Global Processing, or they have an attorney who is charged with liquidation of the estate. So they want to make sure that leading up to that bankruptcy, the company didn't pay out all of their buddies first. And so to alleviate that, they want to get all the money that the company paid out in the 90 days prior to the bankruptcy back, and then they'll pay that money out in some fashion to people who had put forward claims who weren't paid. It's a little bit complicated in agriculture because farmers who weren't paid grain for their grain were able to apply to the Iowa Indemnity Fund to get at least 90% of that money back. Because for Iowa Indemnity Fund, it covers people who deliver into Iowa, as even if you farm somewhere else. So they were paid. Agriculture hasn't really played much of a role in these preference letters or clawbacks, as they're called, sort of commonly. But this has happened 4 times in the last decade, and so I do think that there's some protections needed for farmers. Unfortunately, these letters would say, you sold 4 shipments of grain in the 90 days preceding. You have to give all that money you were paid for the grain back to the company. But then you aren't able to apply to the indemnity fund at that time because the claim period has closed. And so farmers are just out that money. Does that answer the question for you, Greg?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
I
you're
have
welcome.
I have another question too.
Mhm.
But as we go in, you mentioned all these bills that are pending in the House or the Senate, and it must be have been for a long time because I can see all these imports that are coming in the United States, and so much of it has been fraudulent grain on top of it, which is a double whammy. But it's just a mystery to me with the size of the imports to the United States, why we don't have a much stronger market in the United States for organic growers to raise grain that would provide this better price structure. And perhaps some of these bankruptcies are one of the reasons why that doesn't expand like you'd think. It's just there's something wrong with our agricultural policy where we have a strong demand for organic grain, but we have to import, I don't know what percent, a large percent of what's used because we don't grow it here in the United States. Where is the problem with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are good questions. And I think, that's part of like how we do our work is getting farmers together to really hone in on the problem and identify solutions. Um, I think part of it is that we could even expand to meet our local demand, but we have competing interests. So obviously, buyers who are buying ingredients for feed, perhaps, they want to get the lowest price. And folks selling into the United States, if they can grow it for cheaper, want to get into that market. Or if they think they can get by some of our compliance and enforcement oversight and sell conventional grain as organic, then they're really getting an economic boost. So the incentive to do that is high. The incentive for fraud into this market is high because the economic benefit is so great, which just means that our enforcement and oversight needs to be really top notch. And the National Organic Program has been really working hard to get their program up to where it needs to be to have better oversight. I think the NOP directive is a good sign that they are really making progress, but we were behind the ball. Um, And I think, organic infrastructure is another piece of where we need to build up so that we can meet that demand more domestically at a competitive price or with the product that buyers are looking for. But I think there's more conversation that needs to be had around that issue. We have a lot of resources on clawback on our website. They're very comprehensive. So if you know anyone who has questions about it, please send them our way. Let's talk, if it's okay with you, Angela. I see we're at the 30-minute mark. I have just like maybe 4 more slides about the election.
Yeah, this is good. Keep going. We're good. We're good with time.
Great. All right. So these numbers are still in flux, but Senate is decided. So we know we will have a Republican majority in the Senate. And it's an expected Republican majority in the House, although there's still 16 uncalled seats, so that has not been determined yet. The new Congress starts on noon at January 3rd, and committee assignments are typically made in January. So that's sort of what we will be seeing over the next few months, a shift. And then how does this impact the Farm Bill? So because the Republican or the Senate will go to Republican, the House currently has majority Republican now, and they have a draft of the Farm Bill. So it's unlikely that they will want to negotiate with the Democratic Senate on pushing a Farm Bill forward in this lame duck, when if they wait just a few months, they'll have full majority and they can just do what they, already have drafted. So it's unlikely that they're going to push forward a Farm Bill in this lame duck session, and will probably wait until the new Congress is in seat. So that means that they start in January. They assign committee assignments, and then we're probably looking for a February, March, April Farm Bill if everything's moving forward smoothly. It'd be good to have something done in the spring because I know folks are waiting on this Farm Bill. But that's probably the timeline. See a question. Should parallel production continue for the indefinite or be allowed in certification? That's a split operation where someone has some fields in conventional and some in under certified organic. I think that's a good question. I think it's something that will be coming into our risk-based certification conversation. If you don't have a split operation, maybe you could slice off a whole bunch of regulatory oversight because you're already lower risk because you don't have that commingling happening in your operation. So I think that's probably where that will lead to taking away the opportunity for someone to manage a split operation or parallel production. Seems to me like it would be very difficult to get through in rulemaking. But giving an advantage for a full certified organic operation to not have to deal with some of the extra oversight that you would need for parallel production, I think that's definitely possible and something we'll be talking about. And then finally, I just wanted to remind you that OFA is here to represent you. Your voice is who we're representing in Washington, D.C. And the more you engage with us, the more, we get to hear what's happening on your farm and what type of solutions you need to be successful organic farmers. And so I just encourage you to keep engaged if you are a member, and if you haven't joined, to get engaged and join one of our work groups or committees. You actually don't have to be a member to be on one of our farmer work groups. We want to just make that opportunity available for organic farmers to get their voice in the mix and help identify those solutions that will help you be more successful farmers. So consider that. I have some time for questions, and then here's my email if you want to follow up with anything that we discussed.